Have you ever stopped to wonder how our world, with all its chaos and questioning, actually got this way? I mean, it's pretty wild when you think about it. In just about 50 years, the entire foundation of Western thought just cracked. It gave way. So today, we're going to dig into A.C. Ward's analysis of this Great Unraveling. We're going to explore how a world that was built on absolute certainty just completely fell apart.
Okay, this quote right here from a character in a Bernard Shaw play, it perfectly captures that feeling of the early 20th century. Just imagine it. That sensation when everything you believe in, everything you thought was permanent, just suddenly starts dissolving right under your feet. And the thing is, this wasn't just some abstract idea. It was the actual lived experience of an entire generation. All right, so to really understand the collapse, you first have to appreciate the building that got torn down, right? The Victorian world, well, they saw themselves as a house built on permanent foundations. We're talking about institutions like the family, the British Empire, religion. These weren't just traditions to them. No, they were seen as final, unchangeable truths, set in stone.
And this really gets to the absolute core of the Victorian mindset. See, the defining thing wasn't what they believed, but how they believed it. It was this insistent, almost built-in acceptance of authority with a capital A. They had this deep-seated desire to agree, to affirm, to confirm, not to question or push back.
But of course, that solid rock foundation was about to be rocked by two incredibly powerful forces. First, you had the scientific revolution, which was just changing the physical world at a dizzying pace. And second, there was this new intellectual spirit bubbling up, a spirit that wanted to probe, to question, and to test absolutely everything the Victorians had just taken for granted. And this really lays out the central paradox of the 20th century. It seemed like every single technological leap forward came with a moral or a spiritual step backward. I mean, think about it. The same science that gives us the freedom of the motor car also makes mass destruction from the air possible. Progress and regress, they suddenly became two sides of the exact same coin.
So this led to a whole new creed, championed by thinkers like George Bernard Shaw. And it was the absolute opposite of that old Victorian acceptance. The new rule was question, examine, test. The new job for every thinking person was to personally examine every single dogma, test every authority, and just throw out any old prejudice that didn't hold up anymore.
And the pace of this change, it was just breathtaking and, frankly, terrifying. I mean, look at this timeline. The Wright brothers make their first flight in 1903. Just 11 years later, those very same machines are being used for warfare on a scale nobody had ever seen. And then, only a few decades after that, boom, we're in the atomic age, with the power for total, absolute annihilation. It's just staggering.
Now, this new spirit of questioning, it didn't just change technology and society. Oh no. It also completely shattered the world of literature, splitting it right down the middle. Suddenly, you had two totally distinct camps, and each one had a completely different answer to the big question, what is art even for? So on one side, you had the Fabian Society group. We're talking figures like Shaw and H.G. Wells. Their motto was basically art for life's sake. They believed literature should be a tool, something to create social and political change. And then on the other side, you had the Bloomsbury group, with writers like Virginia Woolf. Their whole thing was art for art's sake. They were way more concerned with beauty, with big ideas, and with personal relationships.
Okay, so for the first 20 years of the century, literature, no matter which camp it came from, was still pretty accessible. It spoke to a general, intelligent reader. You could pick it up and get it. But then came a single year, a year that would change the course of literature forever.
1922. That's the one. This is the year A.C. Ward points to as the point of no return. It's the exact moment when literature takes this sharp, very deliberate turn away from the public and starts writing for the specialist, the academic. So why? What happened in 1922? Well, these two literary bombshells dropped. You had Ulysses by James Joyce and The Wasteland by T.S. Eliot. And these books, they were dense, they were complex, they were jam-packed with obscure references. They demanded a kind of intellectual heavy lifting that the average reader just wasn't prepared for or interested in.
And the consequence of this was, well, profound. As Ward puts it, literature basically left the high road of communication. It retreated into what he called an esoteric fastness, which is a great phrase. It's like it built a fortress of intellectualism around itself, and only a small, highly educated elite had the key. Suddenly, art just wasn't for everybody anymore.
So, while the intellectual elite were locking themselves away in their fortresses of art, something else, something really profound was happening out in post-war society. The very idea of what it meant to be an individual, that started to change big time.
See, at the start of the century, the ideal was the common man. Think of characters from H.G. Wells, unique people with their own quirks, their own stories. But the post-war reality, that was the mass man. In the huge, sprawling machinery of the welfare state, the individual became just an anonymous component. You weren't a person so much as a punch card in a giant system. And this mass man pretty quickly turned into consumer man. Here's how it happened. First, the post-war affluent state created a ton of prosperity, full employment, high wages. That in turn fueled this explosive new desire to own and show off status symbols. And then the final piece. Advertisers got really good at a new, more manipulative game. They started using psychology to link everyday products to our deepest subconscious desires, things like love and sex and social acceptance.
Of course, not everyone was buying into this new world order. Not by a long shot. A powerful counter-movement popped up, the beatniks. They took one look at this affluent, consumerist, conformist society and just felt utter disgust. And their solution was pretty radical. They decided to just contract out of society altogether.
And their rejection was total. They abandoned every single convention of what was considered a respectable life. This wasn't just about wearing different clothes or listening to different music. No, this was a complete inversion of values. They embraced everything that mainstream society feared, from promiscuous sexuality and drug use to living like homeless tramps, all while dipping their toes into things like Zen Buddhism. So where did all of this leave society? Well, let's recap. The old Victorian house of certainty was completely demolished. The new intellectual movements had retreated behind closed doors. And you had this society of mass consumers being confronted by a youth culture of total rejection. What was left? A world that had kind of lost its center. The foundations were gone.
I mean, the transformation was just so stark. It wasn't just a change, it was a complete reversal of values. The old acceptance of authority, that became contempt for authority. That commendable sense of privacy and reticence, it was replaced by a passion for exhibitionism. And a consciousness of personal dignity, well, that often gave way to a culture that seemed to celebrate, for lack of a better word, loudishness.
And here's a fascinating twist. As time went on, people started to look back, and their perspective shifted. From the vantage point of the mid-20th century, things that were once dismissed as Victorian hypocrisy, their strict social codes and formal manners, started to look a little different. Maybe, just maybe, it was actually a valuable form of social restraint and modesty.
Especially when you contrasted it with the new culture that had taken its place. A culture that preferred to live its life entirely in public, one that was driven by a new kind of celebrity personality cult, and this all-consuming passion for exhibitionism, to be seen, to be noticed, to perform.
And that really brings us right up to today, leaving us with a pretty critical question, don't you think? The Victorians had their rock of certainty, and we saw what happened when it crumbled. So in our own age, an age that has inherited this legacy of questioning absolutely everything, what's our foundation, if anything? What are we building on?